So for those of you that don't know me, again, my name is Dennis Brown. I've been an entrepreneur for over 20 years. I've been truly blessed. Built 3 multi-million-dollar companies in my career. The last business that I built was a logistics company, a freight brokerage, like we're talking about today. Started that in 2003. I had no experience in logistics. Grew that to over $80 million in sales and sold that in the last couple of years to pursue some other ventures. But I am also the owner of FreightBrokerBootcamp.com, which is the most cost-effective and comprehensive online freight broker training program available today. For those of you that are curious, feel free to check that out at FreightBrokerBootcamp.com. So today we are going to talk about how to convert a cold call into a warm call. And now we got about a bunch of people on the stream. I'm going to get started. So first, let's take a quick poll. All right, we got some people live here. If you like cold calling, all right, tell me, put in the chat box, you yes or no to cold calling. Do you like cold calling? Do you enjoy cold calling? Do you enjoy dialing the phone 100 times a day, getting tons of rejection, and typically not getting a whole lot of things done? You know, if you enjoy cold calling, do me a favor. Type yes in the chat box. If you don't like cold calling, well then type no. Let me know in the chat box if you guys like cold calling or not. I'd love to hear from you guys on that, because I can tell you that cold calling does work, but it's hard, okay? And you have to have very thick skin, and you are truly playing a numbers game. You know, Robert says not really. Scott Ben says not really. Charles Largan says no. Gregory Wallace, it's okay, but could be better. Marley says no. Most people in business, Deborah says no. Thank you guys for chiming in. I appreciate that feedback, because that's the reason why I decided to do this training, is because, you know, while cold calling is okay and you can get customers that way, it is getting increasingly harder to do cold calling. Why? 2 main reasons, and both of them have to do with the internet, okay? The internet has made it very easy for buyers of any product or service to go online and do their research online without having to speak to a salesperson. Okay? The internet and social media have made it very simple for a buyer, whether that be you or me or a traffic manager or a logistics manager or CEO, whoever it is, whoever's buying something can go online and do their research without ever speaking to a salesperson. Prior to the internet, it was very difficult to get information about a product or service, right? It was very time consuming. You would have to use the phone book. You would have to get referrals from people. You would have to get something in a direct mail piece. Somebody would have to call you. You would have to call them back. It was very time consuming to get information about a product or service. Now, some of you might not even remember those days, because the internet has been very popular for over 20 years now, and the popularity just continues to grow. But that's the primary reason. Buyers do not need to talk to salespeople in order to get information about the products or services. Secondly, technology as a whole has made it harder for salespeople to connect with decision makers via the phone, because phone systems and technology centered around the phone has gotten so much more robust. They can now filter out phone calls. There's voicemail, there's caller ID, there's all of these different tools built into phone systems that when somebody doesn't recognize exactly who you are, they don't need to answer the phone. They send you right to voicemail. And they don't even need a screener. They don't even need somebody who screens their calls, because the phone systems do it for them. So that's 2 reasons why cold calling has gotten a lot harder, okay? Now, what is warm calling? What's the difference between a warm call and a cold call? A cold call is you contacting somebody who has no idea who you are, and you have very little contextual information about them. You don't know who they are. You simply know that it's a lead, a name, and a phone number, phone number, and maybe an email that you have, and you're reaching out to them. All right? And from there, you're going to try to make magic happen. That's a cold call. A warm call, on the other hand, is where you gather what I call sales intelligence. And I'm going to go over that. You gather sales intelligence and market intelligence, and then you use that intelligence to significantly increase your odds of success. So what is sales intelligence, right? Sales intelligence is intelligence and or data and or information that dramatically helps you increase your chances of winning in a sales process. So let me share with you an idea of some sales intelligence. I'm going to give you examples from two different sources that you can go to gather sales intelligence that will help you to make, to convert a cold call to a warm call. So the process for converting a cold call to a warm call is step number one. You need to gather sales intelligence. There's two places you can go for that. LinkedIn, particularly for the B2B, which is what we're talking about. You're selling to a business, LinkedIn and or Google, right? So I'm going to start out with LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the world's largest professional network. There are a lot of decision makers on there, whether they be in whatever industry, but particularly in the shipping, in the manufacturing, distribution, import, export industries. There are a lot of connections on there. Traffic managers, logistics managers, shipping managers, warehouse managers, all the people that make the daily decisions on freight are on there. So if you were to go on one of your prospects, say he's a traffic manager for XYZ widgets, right? They make these widgets and they have to ship them. If you were to go on his LinkedIn profile, you would be able to gather sales intelligence in a variety of different formats. Number one, you would know his educational history, his background on education, where he went to college, what he went to college for. Okay, you'd know that. You would know his work history. Okay. If you guys have questions, by the way, hold them to the end, jot them down, and we're going to do live Q&A at the end. Okay. If you're just joining me now, we are going to do live Q&A. Today, we're talking about how to convert cold calls into warm calls. So when you go to his profile, you can gather sales intelligence like his educational background, his history, where he went to college. You can gather information about his work history, how long he's worked for the organization, different roles he's played in the organization. You can gather information about his hobbies sometimes. Like if you are on my profile, you know that I do judo, you know that I like fishing and hunting. Those are pieces of information that are very valuable. I'll show you how to use those in the second half of this. You can gather information about what LinkedIn groups I belong to. Obviously, that's important because those are topics that I'm very interested in. You might even be able to gather my birthday, which obviously has advantages. You can gather what influencers I follow, like I follow Bill Gates and Guy Kawasaki and different influencers in and around business and internet marketing, social media marketing, things of that nature. You can gather information about what articles I've written via LinkedIn, what articles or content I've shared or engaged with, maybe content that I've liked or commented on. That type of information is invaluable. You can also gather information about who I'm connected with. So if we have mutual connections, so if I'm connected to Joe and Joe is already first level connections with the traffic manager, your prospect, that's extremely valuable. So those are ideas of the type of sales intelligence that you can gather from LinkedIn. Now there's a whole bunch of other stuff. I just touched on some low-hanging fruit. But give me a thumbs up if that makes sense. Does that make sense how LinkedIn can give you information that I'm going to show you later how to use this type of information to convert a cold call into a warm call? That type of information, do you see how valuable that can be? Their educational background, their work history, hobbies, the different LinkedIn groups they belong to. Give me a thumbs up if that makes sense. Their birthday, influencers, content they're engaging with, right? That is extremely valuable information. And the cool part is if you go on someone's LinkedIn profile, it takes you all of 30 seconds to a minute to gather that information, gather a couple of notes, jot it down before you make your call. All right. So that's the number one source is LinkedIn. I would always recommend you go there. All right. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile set up, I suggest you go do that. It's free. It costs you absolutely nothing. Okay. Thank you, Marley, for clarifying that. She says it makes a lot of sense. All right. The second source of information, actually, there's three sources. The second source of information would be go to Google and you can search for the company name, which there'll be a whole bunch of information that will come up. But more importantly, where I want to dive into is the company website. So if we're calling the traffic manager from XYZ widgets, and he makes widgets and needs to ship them from point A to point B, right? So what you can do is you can go to that company website, and on the company website, there's a whole bunch of information you can gather very, very quickly in less than a minute or two. Information like the name of their top executives. You can gather who are their vice presidents, who are their C-level executives, who are the owners, who are the founders. That type of information, when you refer to that type of information in a cold call or in a warm call, and you can reference the CEO by name, that's extremely powerful. But when you have no idea what the company does or who founded it or any history on it, it says a lot. It says that this guy doesn't know enough about me. He hasn't done his homework. So press releases, that's another great thing you can go to. Press releases. What do they do in press releases? They talk about if they acquired a new product. They talk about major hires. They talk about expansion. They talk about new products and services they've launched. They talk about all kinds of things in press releases that can be extremely valuable. That type of sales intelligence is very powerful. Other things like articles or media they've been featured in. If they've been featured in major media, whether that be newspapers or magazines or trade journals or whatever it is, if they've been featured in that media, typically it's going to be on their website, right? Because they really want to highlight that they're a very polished, solid, well-known company, right? So it helps their brand. And so knowing that information, gathering that information in advance of a call can be very powerful. You're also going to understand what products they sell. I'm shocked sometimes how salespeople, whether it be in the brokerage industry or otherwise, do so little research. They call up a company and they have no idea what they do. They don't even know what products they make or sell. Okay? So, I know you're not going to do that. I know that you, and I'm pointing to you, won't do that. But knowing the types of products that they sell and just knowing the basic fundamentals of what that product is extremely valuable. Okay? So let me just see. I'm getting a couple complaints about live not working. I don't know. I think I'm getting a bunch of people that are still seeing it. So if your live is not working, I apologize. You're probably just in a bad cell area or a bad internet area. You can come back into the replay and check it out later. But I'm getting a lot of engagement. People are liking, commenting, and it's live on my end. So apologize for that. You can always come back on the replay and check it out afterwards. So more information you can gather from their website. You can gather whether they're a publicly traded company or they're a private. That's very important because public companies have to disclose their financial data. So you can literally go into a publicly traded company and do research, and you can find out how much revenue they do. You can even find out, if you dig deep enough, how much they spend on logistics, trucking, transportation related services, which is powerful, right? If you know going in that a company spends $11 million on shipping and transportation, that's very powerful, right? Compared to a small company that spends $100,000 a year, right? You've got a much higher opportunity to score a significant client with a little bit larger client, right? So you know whether they're public or private. You know how long they've been in business. Typically they're going to tell the history of how the company originated and where it came from and how long they've been in business, right? You're also going to know about different locations. So if they're a large company and they have multiple locations across the U.S., across North America, throughout international, Europe, Asia, Australia, knowing that information is extremely powerful, right? So sales intelligence is a great way for you to gather a bunch of information that you are now going to turn that cold call into a warm call. So how does that happen? I'm going to give you a couple of examples using the data that I shared with you on how to do that, right? So here's scenario A, which is the cold call. We pick up the phone, we have somebody's name and phone number, we call them up, and we know little or nothing about them, and our goal is to make magic happen on that call, build immediate rapport, and then at that point, hopefully within the first several calls, be able to ship goods for them, right? But that's very timing oriented, and it can be very challenging because you don't have enough information. You are not armed with enough solid information. So, scenario B, we gather the sales intelligence that I just talked about from places like LinkedIn, their company website, Google, information about the company, information about the individual themselves, that's the decision maker. And now we call them up and we utilize some of that information. So I'll give you a perfect example. Say on their LinkedIn profile, you notice that they like judo. I'm a black belt in judo, a judo instructor, been so for a very, very long time. And you know I'm a huge advocate and a fan of judo martial arts, right? So it has nothing to do with business, but you know this going in. And so part of your conversation right at the very beginning, early in the conversation, and you incorporate into your sales call is you say, hey, listen, I see that you enjoy martial arts. I studied martial arts as a kid, or my uncle's an instructor for karate, or, my cousin did judo. I remember watching him as a kid go to judo tournaments, and that's the type of rapport and information that allows you to quickly develop relationships because you have something in common that's not necessarily just about business, okay? So that's taking a personal piece of information, sales intelligence about your prospect, and I used my example of judo and my love for martial arts and teaching, right? And you used and leveraged that to develop better rapport and a relationship with me by bridging the gap and showing that we have some things in common. That's one simple example. Now, I can tell you the difference between that scenario, that second scenario versus the first scenario. If you use the right sales intelligence and you incorporate it into your call early on to build that rapport, it will dramatically increase the time and the willingness that somebody is able to and willing to spend with you on the phone. And the more time they're willing to invest with you on a phone call. Now, you can't sit there for an hour and talk about judo and talk about their hobbies, but it's a great segue into building rapport and then pivoting into the business proposition of understanding a little bit more about their freight shipping needs and how you may be able to help them. Okay, so that's one scenario. Now let me give you another scenario. First, before we move forward, did that make sense? If that made sense, give me some thumbs up. Because I'd really like to make sure you guys understand what I'm talking about, because this is a little bit higher level. This is something that, is difficult to cover in a short training. But I can tell you that once you grasp this information, once I grasped this information and I understood how to gather sales intelligence and how to incorporate it into the sales process, I made less calls, I had less rejection, and we had more clients. And it was huge for the business. All right. So I'm going to give you one more scenario, okay, on how you can use the sales intelligence. And I think that will help. I hope that helps bridge the gap here on how to leverage this, okay? So Blaine says it makes a lot of sense. Deborah works great to build trust. That's right. Sales intelligence builds trust. People do business with people they know, like, and trust. So the more information that you can gather about that other person to create that common bond, that you get to know each other better, the more likely they are to trust you and the more likely they are to do business with you, right? It's know, like, trust. That's the process. Someone has to know you before they can like you, and they have to like you before they can trust you. And if they don't trust you, they can't buy from you. Very simple. All right? Great. So now we're going to work into that second scenario. The second scenario is, say you go to their website and you notice that XYZ Widget Company just acquired XYZ Widget Company is in Buffalo, and because I'm in Buffalo, I always use Buffalo as the example. And they acquired a company out of Los Angeles, okay, out of LA. They acquired a company, maybe it was a competitor that was selling widgets too, and now they have locations out of LA. Why is that important? Why is that type of sales intelligence valuable? Well, number one, you're going to, by knowing that information and sharing that information in an early conversation, you're going to show that you've done your homework and you're way more educated than 9 out of 10 salespeople that call them. All right. Secondly, that information can be extremely valuable because now there's a great opportunity that they're going to have shipping needs out of that area. And during an acquisition, there's always struggles with logistics, right? Whenever there is somebody gets acquired or purchased, the logistics is one of the things that always struggles because now they're trying to merge systems. They're trying to merge the talent within their organization. They're trying to merge the entire organization. And I can tell you that mergers and acquisitions are very painful for companies. And so a lot of times that's a great opportunity for you to get involved with a client because they need extra help. Okay? So for example, scenario A, we call up as a cold call and we know very little about that person and we try to make magic happen on a phone call where we have no information. Very difficult. Scenario B is we have sales intelligence that they recently acquired a competitor out of LA, out of California, and we know that they acquired this company that was a competitor. Now, if I were to call up that prospect who's a traffic manager, and this is just one way to do it, right? I'm just giving you a hypothetical. And I use that information in the phone call and I call them up and I say, hey, Joe, Dennis Brown. And I shared during that early part of that conversation that I read about how they had just acquired ABC company out of LA. And I know how challenging acquisitions can be and that I'm sure he's probably, got his hands full, because of the recent changes. And I can talk to him about that process and I can talk to him about some of the things that are going on, additional duties and responsibilities and stress and issues that he's having because of the acquisition. And invariably, it's almost always going to happen. There's always going to be a heavier workload. There's always going to be more stress. There's always going to be more challenges when you're trying to merge these companies. And what it does is, again, it shows, number one, that I'm more educated than most people. Number two, I was able to show him that I understand some of his challenges and I can appreciate some of his challenges, and it automatically differentiates me from the competition who's calling up and just saying, hey, what freight do you have for me? Hey, I want to ship your freight. Hey, do you have any loads I can move? Begging for freight, okay, rather than developing a relationship and rapport with that prospect, okay? So, and then God forbid you actually go the extra mile and you look on the website and you can use the CEO or CFO or the vice president of logistics first name. And you can call them up and say, yeah, I read an article with that your CEO was highlighted in, or that your company was highlighted in, or that your vice president of logistics wrote in Inbound Logistics or wrote for a trade journal. Having that type of sales intelligence allows you to turn a cold call where you have no information and your expectations are you're hoping that lightning in a bottle happens, right? Which is what cold calling is all about. Perfect timing, just everything clicks perfectly, which is why it's only 1 or 2% out of 100 where you get any sort of ROI, or where you use warm calling, which is gathering sales intelligence, framing that into your early conversations to develop rapport and do relationship building, which will literally, in my opinion, 10x your overall results. You will get more response from more people with less rejection and more clients by converting from cold calling to warm calling. And I showed you how easy the process is in this short training. Go to LinkedIn, pull up your prospect's profile, spend 30 seconds to a minute going over the basic information, his educational background, different information about how long he's worked at the company, all the hobbies, all that sales intelligence I shared with you there. spend another minute on his website understanding press releases, understanding the names of top executives and all the other information that I shared with you, and then coming up with a quick strategy on how to frame that into your initial phone call, and you will be absolutely shocked at the difference in results. You'll be shocked at how much more engagement and how much faster you are able to develop a relationship with those prospects. Remember, people buy from people they know, like, and trust. Part of sales intelligence is bridging that gap, that first gap of getting to know somebody. It's using that information to show what you have in common, show that you have a common bond and you have knowledge outside of the average salesperson, and you're willing to use it and deploy it to develop a relationship. Like is something that happens during that process. Trust is something that happens after a little bit of an extended period, and then people will eventually buy if they know, like, and trust you. So with that in mind, I'm sure you guys have some questions. Feel free to throw them into the chat box. Deborah, thank you for the feedback. Love it, love it, love it. Thank you, Deborah, very much for the feedback. And if you guys have questions, now is the time. I've got maybe about 5 minutes or so. We've been on here for about a half an hour. I got about 5 minutes or so that I can do Q&A. So type your questions into the chat box right away. Get them in there so that I can try to address the questions. And again, today we talked about how to convert cold calls into warm calls. And I can tell you that once I learned how to do this, I made less phone calls, I had less rejection, and I had more clients. And if you take the basic framework that I shared with you on how to gather sales intelligence from LinkedIn, how to gather sales intelligence from the internet, including Google and their company website, and then you turn that into gold in the conversations you have early on, you're going to be able to develop relationships quicker, which in turn will develop more customers faster, all right, with less rejection. So does anybody have any questions? Because I'm not seeing, I'm trying to refresh this here. Let's see if I've got any specific questions here. If you have questions, put them in the chat box. If not, I will gladly sign off. You guys can always add your questions later, and I will respond to them, either through private message or through the chat, through the string here in chat. I don't see any questions right now. So here's what I can tell you, and I'm going to wrap this up. Number one, I want to thank you guys for joining me. All right, I want to thank you for joining me. These live trainings, I have a lot of fun doing them. I've gotten incredible feedback from people. Every Monday at noon, I do live training. All right, every Monday at noon, I do live training. The topic is always different. Sometimes it's sales related, sometimes it's marketing related, sometimes it's motivational, sometimes it's operational. But ultimately, I do training every single week, Monday at noon. Put it down in your calendar. Somewhere on this video, if you're watching it live, you should be able to click a button that says get notified when I go live. If you click that button, every time I go live, you'll get notified through Facebook, and you will never miss those trainings. I try to send out emails every week. And so that's a great way to make sure you don't miss these trainings. All right. Okay, Deborah has a question. I'm glad before we jump out. It says, I was told to send a letter via regular mail to thank them via mail. So if you're talking about thanking them after the phone call, after you've had initial phone call and sending a follow-up letter to thank them for their time, I agree with that. I think that's a great strategy. Why is sending them a letter a great strategy? Because nobody sends letters anymore. Nobody sends letters anymore. Nobody sends snail mail anymore. This guy's going to get a piece of snail mail directly to him, and it's going to be the only letter that has been personally addressed to him that he's gotten for months. So you'll automatically differentiate yourself. You'll stand out from the crowd. So that's a great idea. Now, a lot of people will send a follow-up email, but this guy gets emails all day long. So sending a letter, I think, is a great idea, a great way to differentiate yourself. By the way, just so you guys know, the feedback that I've gotten from the B2B marketing community is that direct mail is on the rebound, and that direct mail is getting much better response rates than it used to 5 or 10 years ago, because there's less people doing direct mail. Everybody's doing Facebook advertising and email advertising and content marketing and all the online stuff, but they're not doing direct mail. So if you can send a letter to your prospect, I think that's a great idea. All right. So Blaine asks, what can I do to bring more clients to my website? Okay. That's a very different topic, and I will give you a little bit of framework on how you might be able to do that, but that's a very different topic. What I can do is I can add that to the list of future potential trainings. So what I would do if I wanted to increase the traffic to my website, you're a new broker or a new agent, you want to get traffic to your website. I'm going to make the assumption there's two ways you can drive traffic. You can pay for traffic, which is you can pay for advertising online, which typically most freight brokers and agents aren't going to be able to do early on because it can be very expensive, okay? Or you can do what's called organic traffic, right? Or you can drive traffic organically. The way to do that is typically you need to publish content on your website on a regular basis. It's called content marketing. Typically, you're going to publish articles and blog posts on your website. And then you're going to do search engine optimization on those articles. So Google indexes those articles, which in turn, when people search for your search terms on Google, your content will come up and people will click on those links and they will drive through to your traffic. That's one strategy, is search engine optimization with content marketing. Another strategy is through social media, LinkedIn being one of them for B2B in particular. You could go to LinkedIn and you could start driving connections that you have first level connections with. And then you could share via LinkedIn messages and or LinkedIn updates, content and information that's relevant to that target market. So what might you share? So you might write an article or share somebody else's article about something that's relevant to a traffic manager. So, things about DOT regulations, things that are going to affect his job, things about his specific industry. If he's in the widget industry, he would want to be aware of information about the widget industry. So you will share content and information via social media. The other thing that you can do is to build an email list, right? You've probably heard this before if you've done any sort of internet marketing. Like, for example, I have an email list for Freight Broker Bootcamp of almost 30,000 people that have opted in to receive information from me about becoming a freight broker or a freight agent. Those are active, right? People that are actively on my email list. Now, you may be one of those people. You've asked for information. I've provided you information. So email marketing, gathering an email address where they're opting in to receive information from you and using email marketing is also a very powerful strategy. So I just gave you three strategies. One is content marketing and search engine optimization. Two is content marketing through social media. And three is content marketing through email. One thing you noticed in general is it's always content marketing. You always have to provide some sort of relevant value, much like the sales intelligence that you're gathering in through one of those channels with the objective of developing that know, like, and trust paradigm, right? You have to go through that process, know, like, and trust. So Blaine, I hope that helps a little bit. Blaine asks, can a phone call be as effective as a letter? Well, I think what the other person was referring to is they were doing a phone call and then following up with a thank you letter, right? Some people will send a letter before they do the phone call. So there's different strategies there, right? Maybe you send a letter before the phone call and let them know you're going to be calling them. That's one way to do it. Some people do that. Other people send a follow-up letter after they talk to the person, right? So of course, if you're going to send a letter to every single person that you call, and then potentially you're going to have a much higher cost to do that. If you send a letter to people you talk to, your cost will be a lot less and it'll be a lot more targeted. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. So those are a couple of examples. Robert asks, should I continue to call after a no? Yes. Yes, you should. Now, would you call every day? No. But what I always did and what I always taught people to do, when you get a no on a sales call, here's what you do. You say, listen, I totally understand the timing is probably off. It's not the right timing for you. Would you mind if I followed up with you down the road in a few months? If you get permission to call them later, that is ideal. Now, you don't need permission to call them later, but if you get permission to follow up with them later, that's a reference point that you can come back in on in a future phone call. So when somebody tells you no, say, listen, I understand the timing is bad. I appreciate your feedback. Would you mind if I at least followed up with you in 90 or 180 days just on a quick call? Sure. Typically, they're going to say yes because they want to get off the phone, right? So then you mark that down and you follow up 2, 3, 4 months later and you reposition it. Now, what you don't want to do is if they tell you no, you don't want to call them tomorrow and try to get another yes. You don't want to call them next week and try to get another yes. You don't want to call them in 2 weeks and try to get another yes. Why is that? Because now you're driving them away from you. Now in all honesty, all you're doing is pissing them off, right? And the last thing you want to do is piss off your prospect, because at that point, now he's probably not going to do business with you even if you have a better rate or even if you have better service, okay? So definitely want to continue to call after the no, but you want to give it a little bit of time. My suggestion is 60, 90, somewhere between 60 and 180 days as a follow-up, probably more in the 60 to 90 day realm where you would follow up with them. Because what you have to understand is that just because it's no today doesn't mean it's no forever. Some of my best customers, some of my biggest customers, some of my most valuable customers in the history of owning my own business, okay, in the last 20 plus years were no's when they first started out. As a matter of fact, the majority of them were no's the first time around. And a lot of them were no's the second time around. So a lot of time it's just follow up, follow up, follow up, follow up. There's an old saying in sales, the fortune is in the follow up. So just because it's no today doesn't mean it's no forever. So we've got some other questions here. Shawana Coleman asks, will I be able to watch this on replay? I missed the first few minutes. Yes, absolutely. Once we close this out, the recording will be posted as a replay, and you can check out the entire training anytime you want through the Facebook channel. Plus, if you are on the Facebook channel and you want to click on the videos link in the left-hand navigation, that's a library of all the live trainings that I've done over the last several months, and you guys can go through and check those out anytime you want, right? So Richard says, yes, most common sense, and yes, the best is personal visits to select shipper database, text the shipping manager, know their personal birth date, their kids, and follow up with a call. That's an example of using sales intelligence. Absolutely, no question. The more intelligence that you have, the more likely you are to differentiate yourself from the competition. Because we all know that the trucking logistics industry, just like every other industry, is competitive. And these guys are getting calls, if not daily, weekly, from brokers and agents all around the country that want to ship their freight and saying they're the best, they're the greatest, they're going to do it the cheapest, they've got the best service, right? That's what everybody's pitch is. But if you can differentiate your approach and the quality of the information that you have, you are automatically going to differentiate yourself from the competition, okay? Justin asks, trying to get the live feed to load. I'm here but can't see. Justin, check it out on the replay if you can. For those of you that are struggling with that, just check it out on the replay. Again, you can always enter your questions in the chat box, and I will come back in here throughout the week and try to respond to those questions. So I thank you and appreciate you trying to get on live. Next time, try to make sure you're in a little bit better bandwidth area. Sometimes Facebook is a little goofy with their video live feed because you have so many people online at that given point. They sometimes will struggle with their bandwidth. So apologize for that. And listen, I want to thank you guys. We did more than 5 minutes of Q&A. I did about 10 minutes of Q&A. But want to thank you guys for joining in. If you're curious about how to get started as a freight broker or freight agent, go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com. That's my online freight broker training program. You can check that out. Again, we've trained over 4,000 students. We have a 60-day, 100% money-back guarantee, no questions asked. Feel free to check that out. Make sure you set a reminder for next Monday at 12 o'clock Eastern Time. Why is that? Because I'm going to bring you more free freight broker training through Facebook, just like I did today. So I want to thank you guys for joining in, and we'll see you soon. Have a great week.